Hey, Granny Gear here for Old Guy on a Bike. Question of the day for this Tech Tuesday video. If I were to take your typical gravel bike and I was to fit, say, a 2.2 inch mountain bike tire on it, did I just create a drop bar mountain bike? You know, every once in a while, someone will mention in a comment on one of my videos, or I'll read it somewhere else, and someone's talking about wanting to run a bigger tire on a gravel bike, like those 2.2 Race Kings, Conti Race Kings I mentioned in my Dear Santa video. Someone said, well, you know, Grandy, you're an old mountain bike guy. So what you really want, what you're talking about, is a drop bar mountain bike. That's what you really want. But is it? I don't think it is. And I don't think just putting a bigger tire on a gravel bike makes it a drop bar mountain bike. And in this video, well, I'm going to give you a little bit of history and a little bit of reasons why factually I think that isn't true, but also a whole lot of my opinion on why I think not only do I not want my gravel bike to be a drop bar mountain bike, but I don't think just big tires make them into one. Well, let's set the Wayback Machine to, well, probably pre-1990s anyway. I don't know exactly when it was all happening. I'm not an authority on like dates and times of when certain things come along. You know, I remember like when the RockShox fork first was introduced, you know, to the scene at Mammoth Mountain Norba Nationals. I remember stuff like that. I couldn't tell you when it was. But let's look back in time a little bit and what was happening in the mountain bike scene and when drop bars were introduced and how that was set up on bikes, because it was unique. They didn't just take a drop bar handlebar and put it on a mountain bike. No, it wasn't quite that. So I remember names like Charlie Cunningham made beautiful aluminum bikes. Oh my goodness. Steve Potts, I think, was involved, and undoubtedly there were others. And what they were doing is they were taking their mountain bikes. Now remember back then, this is no suspension, probably running triple chain rings still on our bikes, almost certainly. And the bikes, unless somebody was doing something special like Cunningham with his bikes, they're going to be made out of steel. So this was back in the old days. But when you look at a classic mountain bike, as far as geometry and capabilities and whatnot, they're really not that far off from how we spec our modern day gravel bikes, except they have much better brakes. Now, I don't know what inspired all this drop bar mountain bike stuff, but somebody at one point thought it would be cool to have multiple hand positions available on a mountain bike. Maybe they were roadies, maybe they missed that, or maybe they just thought they had a better idea. But when you take a look at these pictures of these early drop bar real mountain bikes, and tell me what you see that really stands out. You got it? Look at the position of the handlebars. Look at where they are in relation to the head tube. In other words, look at the stack on that bike and look at the virtual stack that's built into the stem. Look how high the front end is. Either it's got a giant head tube or it's got a tall head tube and a stem that goes almost straight up. Now, why is that? Well, because back then, and even on the road back then, people really didn't do a whole lot of shifting and controlling from the hoods. The way we ride our gravel bikes most of the time, we're riding them from the hoods, braking, shifting, whatnot. We'll go to the drops, you know, when we need to, but we almost ride them like quasi-mountain, quasi-modern road bikes. So the hoods is where your hands generally are until things get rough and fast. Well, when you look at the picture of the classic, I will say, drop bar mountain bike, they were designed to be ridden in the drops. And that's why the handlebars are so high. So basically, where you would position your drops would be to pretty much mimic where if you had a flat bar on your bike, where it would be as far as how far above or below the saddle, like how much drop, right, you would have from your saddle to your bar. So where a flat handlebar would kind of be, they wanted to get basically the drops there, maybe like the middle of the curve. And that allowed them to ride there comfortably over long periods of time. Quite a bit different than the way we use our modern day gravel bikes, for sure. The most famous probably person to ride a mountain bike with drop bars has to be John Tomac. If you're old enough to remember John, I used to see him racing in person at like the Northern Nationals back in the 90s. And, you know, he was riding that, what was he on? Was he on a Yeti? He may have been other things. I don't really remember what he rode all the time now, come to think of it. Mongoose, I think, for a while. Anyway, whatever that was, he had that Toyota tension disc rear wheel. He had drops on there, drop handlebars, and used like a Manitou fork, like an early elastomer Manitou fork. And he had some of the worst mountain bike tires on there. Those Toyota, what were they? Farmer John's? Wasn't that Toyota? I don't know. It's Farmer John's. I tried those. Those were like suicide on wheels. Anyway, I digress. Probably remember John Tomac. You say, well, look at what he did. They must be totally valid for mountain bikes. Well, you got to remember, first of all, he's John Tomac and we're not. But also, he ran them surprisingly low. That's hard to tell from the picture maybe I've got here. But his back is almost flat when he's in the drops. It's really mimicking a road bike position, not really a traditional drop bar mountain bike. Now, if I remember correctly, he was starting to ride for a road team back then. And I don't remember all the history of it. There's probably someone out there that knows that much better than I. But what I heard, the reason he did that, he was mimicking the position of his road bike for his mountain bike races, thinking maybe road was in his future. I don't think that ever really worked out. But anyway, that's the way I heard it. So after that kind of faded away, where are we today with a drop bar mountain bike? Well, let's fast forward to something like the Salsa Fargo. Now the latest iterations of the Fargo, they're suspension corrected and they're a little bit different than they were when they first came out. I think I have a picture here of a Gen 1 Fargo. See if I can dig that up. But it would have a steel fork, steel frame. It has braze-ons for everything you can possibly imagine that you'd want to mount, you know, a bike to a bike. And very utilitarian. And look at the handlebar position. It's pretty high. Now, it may not be as aggressive as something like I saw in those early days, but it's really close. If you were riding on the hoods, you have a very, very upright position, which for the kind of things you do on a Fargo, slower rides, loaded up rides, technical rides, that makes a lot of sense, that handlebar to seat position. But is that what I want for my gravel bike, even if I have a big tire on it? Well, I don't think that it is, and I'll tell you why. One of the things I love about gravel bikes is the speed, the agility, the responsiveness, and even though I like a progressive geometry like in my Turner Cyclosis, it's still very, very, it's sprightly, it's enjoyable to ride. You get up out of the saddle and you stomp on the pedals and it really scoots, you know? So would I expect that if I was to ride something like a Fargo, for instance, if you consider that a drop bar mountain bike, or maybe something like this Tumbleweed, the Stargazer, I think that's what it is. That's certainly, in my mind, qualifies as a drop bar mountain bike. And I would say that should take at least a 2.2 inch tire, maybe even something like a 2.4. But when you look at things that sometimes happens when you get into this type of bike, it makes sense for the use. Wheelbase will be a lot longer, maybe a 445 millimeter chainstay. It's going to have braze-ons everywhere. It's going to look a little warty. I kind of prefer a cleaner look. Almost certainly it's not going to have internal cable routing or housing. And I do kind of like that these days. I think it looks nice, at least through the frame, if not through the headset. I'm not going to expect that to respond to pedaling performance as a road bike. You know, it'll do it. It's not going to be a whole lot of fun. Now, one bike, I would say that if I was going to do this, kind of walk that line between mountain bike and gravel bike, would be something like the Salsa Cutthroat. That's pretty light. It's in carbon. All these other bikes, and they're going to be heavy. And that kind of has that interesting blend to me of performance versus mountain bike-ish tire clearance and whatnot. But even that thing has struggled over the years with trying to figure out how to make road/gravel bike drivetrains work with the potential of running like a 2.3 mountain bike tire on it with a short chainstay. It's hard to package all that in there, guys. It really is. So I think the riding experience for me of a drop bar mountain bike in that kind of Fargo class, I'd like to have one, but I don't want that to be my gravel bike experience. Now you've seen those reviews where someone is talking about a bike, maybe a road bike, mountain bike, whatever, and they'll kind of use an automotive analogy. They'll say, oh, you know, this is a some Porsche Panamera or something like that. No, this is a Testarossa, right? You know, oh, yeah. And I'm not enough of a sports car guy to pull that off because, frankly, I don't know that much about them. However, I'm going to give it a shot. So in my analogy of what happens if you take say a 2.2 Conti Race King, just to stay with that tire. It's fairly slim. It's a good riding tire. It's a fast tire. It's as knobby as most aggressive gravel bike tires are. And let's say I put that, if it would fit, into my Turner Cyclosis. What would I end up with in the car world? Well, let's back up a little bit. Let's look at the Fargo. In the car world, what's a Fargo? How about this picture of a Jeep Wrangler? For to me, that's the Fargo. Tons of utility, lots of uses, very configurable. You can do all kinds of stuff with it. Maybe not everything really well, but you can do a bunch of stuff, right? And pull it off that you wouldn't say about a Jeep Wrangler if you've ever driven one, and I have. They aren't exactly exciting to drive. They're not sporty in any way. You don't go, ooh, when I stepped on the pedal and went through that corner, wow, that felt rewarding. No. They're designed to be kind of beasts of burden in a way, kind of like the Fargo. Totally legitimate. It's just not what I want in my main gravel bike. So what is my Turner Cyclosis with a 2.2 tire on it? Well, look at this picture. I just dug this up off the internet. If I take this Porsche and I put some big tires on it, like you see in the picture here, that's kind of what I just did to my Turner gravel bike. It's still Porsche, but look what the tires did to it. Look what that would do if you were going to go drive your Porsche fast down some really bumpy, lousy, crappy desert road. It would be way better than it was, right? But then if you take the tires off, what do you go back to? Now, I know I'm painting with a broad brush. I'm sure this has suspension mods and all kinds of things, but just imagine that it doesn't. Imagine you didn't change anything on that Porsche except magically put the big tire on it, okay? Go with me on that. Take the big tires off and you're back to the Porsche and you go drive it up the coast road to coffee, and by golly, you've got a very satisfying, sporty ride. To me, that's what I want out of a gravel bike. I want to be able to take it up the coast road to coffee. I want to be able to go up that long climb dirt road, to bust down that easy single track, double track, and feel that quickness and response of a sort of road bike with privileges, right? And yet, for those days where I want it to do just a bit more, it's going to be a bit rougher, a bit longer, a lot of dirt, and I realize that even a 45, it's going to be okay, but could be better. That's what I want the 2.2 for. That's what I want to drive that Porsche on. Now in the link below, old friend of mine used to be my web editor back in days of websites. Guy named Guitar Ted, you might know him. He was the promoter and organizer for years of the Trans-Iowa gravel bike race, which is no more, but that was one of the hard ones that I think made something like Unbound seem kind of small. He's been around a long time. He's a very wise man when it comes to things, and he has a real good grasp of history and names and times that just completely elude me. And I'm going to put a link up to a blog post he did talking about the early days of drop bar mountain bikes and kind of maybe how that came about. Hopefully that'll help you. But you know what? This is all, to a certain point, it's really my opinion. You may say, no, to me a drop bar mountain bike is anything that can go in the dirt with drop bars, and maybe it has a suspension fork on it. I mean, what are your qualifications? I don't know. Those are kind of mine. And hopefully you hear me just kind of think about this out loud. This wasn't very scripted, I know. Yeah, maybe it'll help you come to some clarity in your own thinking. You guys have a great weekend or weekend. And as always, go ride your bikes. Whether it's a gravel bike, road bike, or maybe even you have a drop bar mountain bike. Whatever that is.